How did Grandma always seem to create meals without breaking the bank? When thinking back on frequently enjoyed favorites, many seem to have two things in common: simple and cheap. Because if you know what you're doing in the kitchen, you don't have to splurge to make something good. Let's spend 2 hours cooking affordable classics from the past. Starting with the iconic Southern-style collard greens, were often made with meat, onions, and some basic seasonings like salt, pepper, and red pepper flakes. Sounds like a mouthful already, right? Well, it was one delicious mouthful, as all you needed to tie in. The whole flavor was just some vinegar and hot sauce, so it was pretty basic pantry stuff that almost every household had laying around. Every bite was really smoky and savory, but the best part of this dish is that it makes those otherwise chewy and dense greens pretty tender, so they end up going amazing with the smoked meat. Texturally and taste-wise, it's a pretty good dish, and it's definitely one of the better excuses out there to get some much-needed vegetables into your diet. Collard greens have actually been used like that throughout the history of the South, whether it's at a soul food-themed community dinner, families getting through the Depression, or just grandmothers making greens lovingly for their grandkids. It's a great way to spice up an otherwise boring vegetable, and for what it's worth, you stay pretty full after eating them. The first time I tried some of these greens, I was surprised at how I didn't feel hungry afterwards for hours, even though you'd think you'd at least crave a snack after. Seafood was a popular protein choice, as clam bakes were a go-to dinner food in Connecticut. You could find a good clam bake plate for dinner anywhere from homes to restaurants, diners, and even pubs. Clams were a classic seafood in Connecticut because they were harvested and locally produced. Lamb shank and barley soup is another winter favorite that seems to have disappeared from our modern menus. Think fall-off-the-bone lamb shanks simmered in a flavorful broth with barley, fresh vegetables, and aromatic herbs. Barley added a nutty texture and made the soup even more filling. Sounds pretty good, right? Well, this soup was all the rave back in the day. Also known as the Scotch broth, it originated in Scotland in the early 19th century and made its way around to other countries in Europe. This soup was perfect for cold days, as it wasn't only comforting and delicious, but was also packed with nutrients. Since it was light on the pocket, the lamb shank and barley soup were prepared in large batches and enjoyed by families for several days. It had a long shelf life too. What more could anyone want? With the rise of pre-packed and instant soups, this labor-intensive meal has fallen out of flavor. But if you're ever craving this winter meal, there are millions of recipes all over the internet. Meatier dinners were the best option in the 70s as bison steak became popular in Colorado. Bison was one of the most widely hunted animals in the state, with locals having a deep love for the meat. Steaks and American dinners complete each other, so it is no wonder that fresh bison steak with mashed potatoes and asparagus was a fan favorite. Sole meunière is an exemplary dish that highlights the inherent flavors of its primary ingredient through a simple yet precise preparation method. This dish involves a sole fillet, lightly dusted with flour, then pan-fried in butter to a perfect golden brown. After cooking, the fillet is enhanced with a sauce of the pan's browned butter, fresh lemon juice, and chopped parsley, drizzled over the fish to amplify its delicate, sweet taste. The freshness and quality of the sole are crucial. Ideally, the fish is prepared soon after being caught, underscoring the importance of ingredient freshness in French culinary arts. The preparation focuses on preserving the fish's natural flavors, complemented subtly by the nutty browned butter and the bright lemon juice. Choosing sole, a flat fish valued for its fine texture and mild flavor, is vital as it cooks quickly and uniformly, making sole meunière a revered dish for its elegant simplicity. Grandma's curried sausages, a nostalgic winter favorite, have largely disappeared from modern dining tables. This dish featured sausages cooked in a mildly spiced curry sauce, often made with onions, apples, and a touch of cream. The combination of savory sausages and the sweet, spicy sauce made it a comforting and flavorful meal. Curried sausages were often served with rice or mashed potatoes, which helped to balance the rich flavors of the sauce. This dish was a staple in many households, particularly during the colder months, providing warmth and nourishment. However, with the rise of new culinary trends and the availability of more diverse meal options, Grandma's curried sausages have become a rarity. Their disappearance marks the loss of a comforting, home-cooked dish that brought families together around the dinner table. Delaware was also serving seafood dinners, as the blue crab boil was a sought-after dinner. Famously covered in Old Bay seasoning, the blue crab boil came with rosemary, sage, pepper, and of course, the freshest crabs in Delaware. People would enjoy corn on the cob, potato wedges, and an assortment of grilled vegetables with the boil. Galantine of chicken is a testament to the elaborate artistry of classical French cuisine, popularized in the 17th century. It involves a meticulous process where a whole chicken is deboned and stuffed with a seasoned mix of ground meat, fats, and spices, including luxurious touches like pistachios and truffles. The chicken is then encased back within its skin, poached in a flavorful stock and set to cool, often in the gelatin-rich cooking liquid, to form a jelly. Decorated with artistic slices of vegetables, herbs, or edible flowers and coated in a glistening aspic, galantine is served cold, making it a striking centerpiece for buffets and banquets. This dish not only showcases the culinary craftsmanship of detailed butchery and seasoning, but also the aesthetic presentation. So Hai Pai is a traditional dish from the 17th century that might sound intimidating, but it's actually delicious and surprisingly easy to make. If you're ever feeling like whipping a fancy meal on a cold snow day, Hai Pai is your best friend. If Hai Pai doesn't ring a bell, you might know it as raised pie. Strike a note? This unique pie was made using a hot water crust pastry, which allowed the pie to be formed by hand into a high, sturdy shape. But here's the twist. Instead of a pastry crust, it's topped with a layer of mashed potatoes. The best part? It can be filled with anything from ground beef and vegetables to braised chicken. Hai Pais were often reserved for special occasions or holidays, as they required significant time and effort to prepare. The hype for Hai Pai has died down over time, but it's still a staple in some homes who can't seem to let it go, especially during the winter months. Coming back to more appealing dishes like the pot roast. The dish was first seen during the Great Depression when economic times were rough. Pot roast made a comeback in the 70s when Idaho took the basic recipe and added proteins like beef for chicken to create a delicious roast. This made for a perfect dinner as it was filling and would often be cooked in a higher quantity. To start off, home-style lamb casserole was a staple back in the day. What's not to love about tender pieces of lamb slow-cooked with root vegetables like carrots, potatoes, and parsnips in a rich, savory broth? Different versions of this casserole were often flavored with a blend of herbs such as rosemary, thyme, and bay leaves. This hot meal was a hit in the 1900s, especially in the colder months. Now, lamb casserole was not just about sustenance, it was about bringing the family together. It wasn't easy to whip up, so you really had to get your hands dirty and put in the work. Parents and grandparents would pass down their secret recipes and techniques, so the aroma of this hot meal never really left our dinner tables during winter holidays like Christmas. Unfortunately, tradition was trumped by convenience, and this lamb casserole has been pushed aside for quicker, less time-consuming options. The chicken and leek casserole is a celebration of classic French comfort food. But don't credit the French for this delicious meal just yet. This casserole is actually a variation of the Scottish cock-a-leekie soup. It's also known as Scotland's national soup. Think of a casserole that combined tender pieces of chicken with the delicate flavor of leeks, all cooked together in a creamy sauce. The original recipe added prunes during cooking, and traditionalists still garnish with a julienne of prunes. Back in the day, it was perfect for feeding big crowds. Plus, a touch of white wine or Dijon mustard makes the creamy sauce 100 times better. It's surprisingly easy to whip up, which makes it a great weeknight dinner option that's sure to become a family favorite again. You can really impress the family table with this unique casserole. Who doesn't want the whole fam to rave about their cooking skills during the holidays? Go earn your points. Now, skirt steak might seem like a grilling cut, but it's incredibly delicious when slow braised. This dish involved slow cooking skirt steak until it became tender and succulent. The steak was typically braised with vegetables like onions, carrots, and celery, along with a rich broth or wine to enhance its flavor. Skirt steak is also traditional in Mexican cuisine, particularly in the north where it is known as Arrachera. Braised skirt steak was often served with mashed potatoes or crusty bread to soak up the delicious sauce. This dish was a hit at sophisticated restaurants, but that doesn't mean your grandma couldn't whip it up. They're the best chefs after all. Go dust off some old cookbooks and you'll find a traditional recipe that won't disappoint. It's still a dish that's perfect for a cozy night in, a family gathering, or simply when you crave a warm and comforting meal. Named in honor of the Italian opera singer Luisa Tetrazzini, chicken tetrazzini was reportedly whipped up by chef Ernest Arbogast at the Palace Hotel in San Francisco around the early 1900s. This dish, a testament to American culinary creativity, combines diced chicken and mushrooms with linguine or spaghetti in a sumptuous, creamy sauce that's often elevated with a splash of wine or sherry. Once assembled, it's liberally topped with grated Parmesan and baked until a golden crust forms on top. The addition of sherry or wine doesn't only boost the flavor, it also cuts through the cream's richness with its acidity. Typically, this dish is finished with a sprinkle of parsley or paprika to boost its visual appeal and add layers of subtle flavor. Despite its straightforward ingredients, chicken tetrazzini welcomes variations, such as almonds or pimentos, enhancing both its taste and texture. It's not just a delicious meal, but also a smart way to repurpose leftover chicken or turkey. Now, this might be different from other delicious-sounding dishes that we have talked about, but Kalua pig and tails were quite the dinner in Hawaii. Kalua pig and tails was a slow-cooked pork dish that was prepared in an underground oven that locals call imu. Kalua pig is actually deeply embedded in Hawaiian cuisine and culture, as it is served at local feasts and could easily feed dozens of people. Okay, this one might seem strange to modern plates, but mock turtle soup was once a luxurious and popular dish. It is an English soup that was created in the mid-18th century as an imitation of green turtle soup. It often used brains and organ meats, such as calf's head, to duplicate the texture and flavor of the original turtle meat after the green turtles used to make the original dish were hunted nearly to extinction. Now, before you wrinkle your nose, mock turtle soup was a staple at Victorian dinner tables. The original version is a bit off-putting, but nothing wrong with calf meat, right? In the United States, mock turtle soup eventually became more popular than the original dish and is still popular in Cincinnati. Of course, as turtles became more and more extinct, so did this dish that tried imitating their taste in a soup. But hey, it could be reinterpreted with plant-based alternatives for a delicious and cruelty-free twist on this classic winter soup. Coq au vin stands out as a rich, soul-warming dish that is achieved through a slow cooking process that melds the flavors of chicken and wine thoroughly. Traditionally used to soften tough roosters, modern recipes often utilize chicken, marinated, and then braised in wine, typically red, along with mushrooms, onions, garlic, and a bouquet garni. Initially, the chicken is seared until golden, then simmered slowly with lardons, which infuse a smoky depth. This technique showcases French braising skills, starting with a high sear followed by a gentle, prolonged cooking in a covered pot, allowing the intricate flavors to blend and enhance the meat. The selection of wine is pivotal, forming a flavorful sauce base that deeply seasons the chicken, transforming it into a hearty, deeply satisfying stew that exemplifies rustic yet refined French cooking. Bouillabaisse, a traditional Provençal fish stew, once a winter favorite in coastal regions. This dish, originating from the port city of Marseille, was made using a variety of fish and shellfish, simmered together with tomatoes, garlic, saffron, and other herbs. Stew that was both hearty and nutritious. Bouillabaisse was traditionally prepared by fishermen, using the catch of the day that was too bony or undesirable to sell. It was a way to make use of every part of the catch. The dish was often served with a side of rouille, a garlicky mayonnaise, and crusty bread for dipping. What made a bouillabaisse different from other fish soups is the selection of Provençal herbs and spices in the broth, the use of bony local Mediterranean fish, the way the fish are added one at a time and brought to a boil, and the method of serving. It requires a little more effort than some other options, which is why it isn't a part of our dinner tables anymore. Chimichangas are a deep-fried burrito with lots of peppers to add a pretty heavy kick depending on the sauce. Available easily in most states nowadays, chimichanga actually had their roots in Arizona. Macayo's Mexican Kitchen claims they put chimichangas on their menus first in the 1970s. Since then, the dish has ruled over Arizona as a good dinner food that can be served and enjoyed. New England seafood casserole was a beloved winter dish in coastal communities. Seafood never really falls out of flavor, so this dish used to be a timeless classic. This casserole typically included a mix of shrimp, scallops, and white fish, combined with a creamy sauce made from milk, butter, and flour. It was often topped with breadcrumbs or crushed crackers. Now, traditional New England cuisine is known for a lack of strong spices, so if you've got a knack for spicy food, this might be a little bland for you. But for those of us who like to lay low on the spice, this casserole was a comforting and hearty meal, perfect for cold winter nights. Seafood casseroles aren't everyone's cup of tea, but it's definitely a dish worth trying at least once. Remember the slow cooker oxtail stew Grandma used to make during the holidays? Yeah, it wasn't everyone's cup of tea, but if you love oxtail, this is a winter dish straight out of your dreams. The invention of slow cookers in the 1970s made this dish a global hit, as you could make it without the need for constant attention. The oxtail is a cut of meat that requires longer to cook than you can imagine, and I'm sure you can connect the dots to why this one vanished from our dinner tables. Who has hours to spend on a stew nowadays? Well, if you ever find yourself stuck at home with nothing to do, the slow cooker oxtail stew won't only steal away your boredom, but also satisfy all those meat cravings. You just need the meat and then some vegetables like carrots, potatoes, and celery before cooking it all in a deeply flavored broth. Red wine or tomato-based stew both work wonders. This one will stick to your ribs and keep you warm on a cold winter night. Beef marrow toasts was once a popular winter appetizer, but have become a rare sight on modern menus. This dish involved roasting beef marrow bones until the marrow was soft and spreadable, then serving it on toasted bread. The marrow's rich, buttery flavor, often enhanced with a sprinkle of sea salt and a squeeze of lemon juice, made it a decadent treat. Beef marrow toasts were a way to utilize every part of the animal, reflecting a time when resourcefulness in the kitchen was a necessity. The dish was both luxurious and rustic, providing a rich, satisfying start to a winter meal. However, as dietary preferences have shifted and convenience foods have become more prevalent, beef marrow toasts have fallen out of favor. Their disappearance marks the loss of a culinary tradition that celebrates the full use of an animal and the deep, rich flavors that come from traditional cooking methods. Stone crab claws were also just as special in the East Coast and Florida. Eating stone crab claws was an incredible experience. People would either go fishing on their own during harvest time to find the crabs or watch seafood restaurants bring out fresh crabs. The crab would absorb a lot of flavors and could be cooked in just about any method a person preferred. Now, braised sweetbreads, a once popular winter delicacy, have become a rare sight on modern menus. Sweetbreads, which are the thymus or pancreas glands of young animals, were braised with a variety of ingredients, including onions, garlic, and white wine. The slow cooking process resulted in a tender, flavorful dish that was both rich and satisfying. Sweetbreads have a unique, delicate texture that pairs well with a variety of sauces, from creamy to tangy. This dish was often served with vegetables and potatoes, making it a complete and hearty meal. However, as tastes and dietary preferences have evolved, and with the decline in traditional cooking methods, braised sweetbreads have become less common. Their disappearance marks the loss of a culinary tradition that celebrates the full use of an animal and the complex flavors that come from traditional braising techniques. Crown roast of lamb is an exquisite dish often reserved for special occasions and holiday feasts. This majestic preparation involves arranging racks of lamb into a circular shape that resembles a crown, with ribs pointing skyward. It's seasoned with a mix of rosemary, garlic, and thyme, both in the marinade and as a rub applied before roasting. To enhance its flavor and retain moisture, the crown center is typically filled with a stuffing composed of breadcrumbs, minced garlic, herbs, and occasionally dried fruits like apricots or cranberries. The lamb is roasted until it achieves a tender texture and a beautifully browned exterior. Precision in tying the racks together ensures the roast cooks evenly. To perfect its presentation, chefs often cover the tips of the ribs with foil during roasting to prevent charring. This dish not only dazzles as a culinary delight, but also stands as a festive centerpiece, symbolizing celebration and feasting. Lamb shanks epitomize the rich flavors and tender textures celebrated in Mediterranean and Middle Eastern cuisines. Prized for their gelatin-rich connective tissue, lamb shanks transform through slow cooking into melt-in-your-mouth tenderness. The preparation starts with searing the shanks to a golden brown, locking in flavors through caramelization, then braising them slowly in a mix of wine, stock, and aromatics like onions, carrots, and celery, enhanced with herbs such as rosemary and thyme. This method not only tenderizes the meat, but also infuses it with a robust blend of flavors. Typically, the dish is finished with a sprinkle of gremolata, adding a fresh burst of lemon, garlic, and parsley that cuts through the richness. The braised liquid serves as a deeply flavored sauce, reduced to intensify its taste, complementing the richness of the lamb with a perfect balance of flavors. Pea and ham soup got its name because of how affordable it was. This is probably the cheapest thing on the list to make. Actually, it literally costs just a few cents. All you needed was ham and peas. You'd simmer them in the crock pot with diced ham and some vegetables like potatoes and celery, then slow cook it until the soup got thickened. You'd get this incredibly creamy, lovely soup that was just perfect for winter nights or after a long, exhausting weekend. Maybe you want to ease up on your stomach and eat something healthy for a change, but you still want some familiar flavors to keep you company. A soup like this would be right up your alley. It costs nothing, feels better than most things, and you can make it anytime. You could probably even take a nap and wake up to the scent of the soup slowly cooking, becoming the final product. Osso buco is something that's known for smoothness. The way the meat falls off of the bone, the saltiness of the gremolata, the freshness of that first bite, which is an experience that you have to savor all on its own. If you're like one of those people who loves to try out your local Italian-American cuisine, you'd be doing yourself one hell of an injustice by not ever trying this. The way this dish got popular was because while the dish was originally made only with veal, by the time it hit American soil, it was using substitutes like beef or pork shanks. This made the dish accessible for your everyday Joe who can't afford to spend a lot on vegetables because, bills. Plus, if you add some gremolata, which is a mix of lemon zest, garlic, and parsley, to the dish, then you get a pretty balanced set of flavors that bounce off of each other. This is one of the finest parts of Italian-American cuisine, and it got popular for being a wonderful family meal that can keep everyone content and full. Beef bourguignon is a cornerstone from Burgundy, involving marinated and slow-cooked beef chunks, typically tougher cuts like chuck, bathed in red wine, usually Burgundy, to tenderize the meat over several hours. This hearty stew is fortified with onions, garlic, and carrots, and enhanced with sautéed mushrooms and crisp lardons. Historically, this method likely evolved as a means to tenderize and enrich less desirable cuts of meat. The stew develops a rich, deep umami flavor from the Maillard reaction, which occurs as the beef browns, and the complex flavors intensify as the wine slowly melds with the herbs and vegetables. The slow cooking process not only enriches the stew's flavor, but also fills the kitchen with an inviting aromatic warmth, making beef bourguignon synonymous with comforting, rich French culinary tradition. Potato and beef ragu lasagna, a comforting winter dish, has largely vanished from family tables. This unique lasagna variation replaced traditional pasta sheets with thinly sliced potatoes layered with a rich beef ragu and bechamel sauce. The result was a hearty, satisfying meal that combined the flavors of a classic lasagna with the comforting texture of potatoes. The beef ragu, slow-cooked with tomatoes, onions, garlic, and red wine, provided a deep, robust flavor that perfectly complemented the creamy bechamel sauce. This dish was often topped with a layer of melted cheese, adding a golden, bubbly finish. Despite its deliciousness, the time-consuming preparation and the rise of more convenient meal options have led to its decline. The potato and beef ragu lasagna is now a rare treat, remembered fondly by those who enjoyed its comforting, rich flavors on cold winter nights. Fried catfish was a no-brainer for Arkansas because the state is quite literally flooded with catfish. Readily available fish and locals who love fried food led to the creation of fried catfish. A rather interesting way to cook catfish, fried catfish reached the peak of its popularity in the 70s, becoming common at most family dinner tables. Cornish game hen, a petite and elegant poultry choice, typically weighs no more than 2 pounds and is ideal for serving as an individual portion, making it perfect for an upscale dinner. These hens are usually roasted whole, seasoned lightly with herbs like thyme and sage, and basted in butter to achieve a crispy, golden skin while keeping the meat juicy and tender. The cavity may be stuffed with a flavorful blend of breadcrumbs, chopped vegetables, and herbs, enriching the meat during cooking. The cooking process often involves high-temperature roasting to crisp the skin, followed by a resting period before serving to ensure the meat remains moist. Serving Cornish game hens on a bed of wild rice or alongside roasted vegetables allows their delicate flavors to shine, making them a favored choice for intimate dining and special occasions due to their ideal portion size and visually appealing presentation. Classic American dinners often include stews, and Brunswick stew from Georgia was especially popular in the 1970s. In terms of recipe, the stew had many variations from pulled pork to beef or chicken being used along with braised vegetables and Worcestershire sauce. Due to each home customizing the stew, it was bound to be a great hearty dinner. Rabbit stew is a beloved traditional dish in various cultures, renowned for its hearty and comforting nature. This stew typically features tender pieces of rabbit slow-cooked with onions, garlic, and aromatic herbs like rosemary or thyme, which subtly enhance the mild flavor of the rabbit. Additional vegetables such as carrots, celery, and potatoes often join the mix, creating a robust, one-pot meal. The stewing liquid, usually wine or stock, enriches the dish, lending depth and complexity as it simmers. Rabbit meat, known for its leanness and delicacy, benefits greatly from the slow cooking process, becoming incredibly tender and infused with the rich flavors of the broth and vegetables. Rabbit stew is especially appreciated during the colder months or in rural settings where rabbit is a common game meat. Salmon bakes in Alaska go much further back than you would imagine. Introduced in the 1800s, commercial restaurants only started to serve salmon bakes during the 1970s. Chinook salmon was one of the most widely caught fish in Alaska, and so locals created multiple dishes using it. Chicken Marengo holds a storied place in culinary history, famously prepared for Napoleon after the Battle of Marengo. This dish encapsulates the essence of victorious improvisation using local ingredients available at the time. Chicken Marengo starts with chicken pieces sautéed in olive oil, braised with onions, garlic, and tomatoes, enriched by a splash of white wine that deglazes the pan, forming a robust sauce. Later additions often include mushrooms, and traditionally, it was garnished with fried eggs and crayfish, though these are less common today. The slow simmering melds all the flavors beautifully, allowing the tomatoes to break down and create a rich, savory sauce that complements the tender chicken perfectly. This dish exemplifies French provincial cooking, utilizing straightforward techniques and local ingredients to produce a dish rich in history and flavor. Talking about fried food, chicken cacciatore in California is chicken fried in olive oil and then simmered in a sauce of white wine, tomatoes, and herbs. Italian-American restaurants in the state absolutely love having this as either a main course accompanied with garlic bread. The balanced meal of bread, chicken, and tomato soup made for a perfect dinner spread. Beef coconut curry, a flavorful and aromatic dish, has become less common in modern kitchens. This dish combined tender pieces of beef with a rich, creamy coconut milk base, infused with spices like turmeric, coriander, cumin, and chili. The result was a deeply satisfying and warming meal, perfect for cold winter nights. The slow cooking process allowed the beef to become tender and absorb the complex flavors of the spices and coconut milk. Beef coconut curry was often served with rice or naan bread, making it a hearty and complete meal. Despite its delicious flavors, the time and effort required to prepare a homemade curry have contributed to its decline. The rise of ready-made curry sauces and takeout options has also played a role in the disappearance of this traditional dish. For those who remember it, beef coconut curry remains a beloved winter comfort. Fried potatoes and onions were a 1920s classic, especially during the recession, which made it very difficult to get most basic ingredients. You could forget about buttermilk pancakes or nice cuts of steak. People were lucky enough to scrounge up enough potatoes for the week. However, the same mashed potatoes 5 times a week can get pretty dull, so people had to find all kinds of ways to spice things up that involved more than just a tad more black pepper. What they found out was that cutting potatoes into cubes and frying them with onions along with some bread made for a phenomenal combo, and if they had the oil to spare, it created a better texture for the dish. This was affordable enough that people could have it without worrying and tasty enough that it would ease your tensions for a while. Bologna and cheese sandwiches were sandwiches that you could pull out of the refrigerator and have nobody raising any eyebrows, only happy smiles and eager stomachs. Bologna spreads were not too popular in America until the 70s when they first properly started picking up some steam. People got on the bandwagon once bologna and pepperoni pizzas started becoming regular takeout options in states like New York and Chicago. If it works on a pizza by the laws of nature, it must be tried on a sandwich or burger too. We are not sure who came up with that rule of thumb, but they were really onto something, because this made for a great sandwich that was a meal people ate when all there was for dinner was sleep. While a lot of those cheeses and spreads got discontinued now, we would love to try an authentic sandwich from the 70s because it sounds right up our alley. So cranberries make another guest feature on this list with apricot cranberry bread, which was another baked delight that people often had during the holidays and Christmas in particular. You might be starting to wonder why all the obsession with cranberries and Christmas? Is it something like mistletoe where it just has to be there? The answer is a bit of a yes and a bit of a no. See, the thing about America is that there are very few fruits that are native to the land and are commercially grown, cranberries being one of them. Given how they usually sprout during the winter season, people started symbolizing cranberries as a full American harvest, signifying a complete year. So you get all kinds of cranberry-oriented goodness like apricot bread, which goes incredibly great for comfy Christmas brunch for friends and family. Broiled shad was a staple on American dinner tables, especially during the spring shad runs. Shad is a type of herring, and it was plentiful along the East Coast, making it an accessible and popular choice. It wasn't just a dish on our tables. It was a bonding experience for big families who'd gather for meals centered around this particular fish. Now, the best part about this fish is that it was considered flavorful enough not to require sauces, herbs, or spices. A filling of breadcrumbs was enough to add some crispiness. This fish could be boiled, filleted, fried in butter, or baked. Traditionally, a little vinegar was sprinkled over it on the plate. In the eastern United States, roe shads were prized because the eggs were considered a delicacy. These were typically broiled alongside the fish and added a savory flavor to the mix. Now, you can't really have pumpkin bread is also a Christmas comfort meal that you can find just about anywhere, and it was all the rage during the 70s. Recipes were being published in issues of cooking magazines like Good Housekeeping, which was a pretty big deal then. Anyway, people knew exactly what to do with their winter pumpkin harvest as they preserved the best of the best for Christmas. Most people also seem to think that it originated in Native America or from the Pumpkin Bread Media Cookbook. Either way, let's go over the flavor profile of this delicious bread a bit. You can expect some earthy notes as you bite into what seems to be the perfect holiday snack to start your Christmas with, as well as buttery walnut flavors with a velvety texture. You have not seen experimental until you have seen a tuna and apple sandwich. Exactly what it sounds like and worse in reality than in your imagination, a tuna salad mixed with chopped apple slices on white bread. Yes, that is literally the entire concept. And no matter what the fusion food crowd tries to say, we are not trying it or buying into the hype. If only to satisfy the curiosity inside us and scratch that must-try everything itch, would we want this back. But strangely, people in the 70s had the opposite opinion. Cans of Pink Lady tuna and farmers market apples were apparently their idea of a good meal back then. Do you think they were onto something? maybe we are jumping the gun and should take a note out of their book about being open to new tastes. Let's say you have a more active lifestyle and you want to do away with the pancakes and fried stuff for breakfast. You can always try out a classic recipe for oatmeal made with brown sugar and cream, which not only makes oatmeal a lot more interesting than it would be on its own, but ticks off the health boxes. You get your protein, you get your fiber, and you get your taste buds satisfied. Whether you are an adult or a kid, that is a pretty good deal, but especially if you are trying to cut some weight and get into the gym more regularly. Grandparents would typically be aware of that, or that kids would come around to the need of physical activity soon enough, so they would make sure their grandchildren had at least 2 or 3 bowls a week of oatmeal. It was pretty hard to get them to eat it though, so the addition of brown sugar and cream was a godsend. A Christmas dinner is only as good as the sidekicks that accompany the center stage dishes and really make that spotlight shine so much brighter on the main courses you spent all night and day working on. No side dish does that, as well as honey-glazed spiced carrots, which were the appetizer of choice for all the Christmas parties in the 1970s. Most people would take this dish into a savory route by adding Moroccan glazes, but during the 70s, America was in the process of rediscovering its sweet tooth. One of the things that helped along the way was this perfect honey glaze, and it brought out a side of carrots that nobody ever knew existed. They just were not familiar with the game of a good honey-glazed carrot, especially if you put it next to some oranges and served it with maple sauce. Love it or hate it, there's no denying that haggis is a unique and iconic dish. So, what does this dish consist of, you may ask? Well, this Scottish dish is made from sheep's heart, liver, and lungs, mixed with oats and spices, and cooked in a sheep's stomach. Yes, you heard that right. Robert Burns' poem, Address to a Haggis of 1786, made this meal Scotland's very own national dish and a literary classic. It is traditionally served with turnips and potatoes. Back in the day, haggis was popular everywhere around the globe, but it's limited to only Scotland now. While haggis might not be everyone's cup of tea, it's definitely a dish worth trying at least once. So let's get back into some really good breakfast options with sausages and scrambled eggs, which you might have grown up seeing not just humans eat, but cartoon characters, people in movies, and in magazines and ads. There is a good reason for that, and it is because sausages and scrambled eggs were the perfect working-class breakfast. It took very little time to make while you would get ready for your shift, and it took even less time to eat. You will notice that most meals on this list try to strike a balance between taste and prep time, and that is because most of them are made with simple ingredients and recipes. Quick dishes that can help you get a breakfast in without needing you to stay half an hour or more in the kitchen. Top that off with some sauce or gravy if you have any leftovers, as gravy was a staple of many dishes back then, and you had yourself a solid meal. Braised oxtail is proof that our ancestors really knew how to make the most of every part of an animal. An oxtail typically weighs around 8 pounds and is skinned and cut into shorter lengths for this Italian cuisine. This meat is slow-cooked in red wine and braised with vegetables such as carrots, tomatoes, and even lima beans. Oxtail is packed with collagen, so this dish was also used by many women of the Victorian era for younger-looking skin. Many women used to throw parties just to serve it. They took eat your skincare to a whole other level. While the word once meant only the tail of an ox, today it can also refer to the tails of other cattle. Today, this dish is a gourmet delicacy, but back in the day, it was every middle-class worker's dream. The next on our list are some classic country fried steak and eggs with a breadcrumb twist that gives this staple meal a new personality with an exciting crunch. Think of it like eating a slightly crispier steak. Depending on how much breading you choose to use with the steak, the result is a steak that is not chewy or one that needs to be torn rigorously, but one that simply falls apart in your mouth very smoothly. When you pair that up with the delicious gravy that would work just as well with some mashed potatoes as a side, you get one of the 90s best hits. For good reason too, it is hard to make a dish that takes care of everything in one fell swoop. You have your nutrition ticked off, it gets you full. It is not too expensive to make, and the kids love it. One has to wonder what more you could ask from a dish. Speaking of garlic bread, it would often go great with some stuffed mushrooms, but they were good enough to stand on their own as a Christmas dish too. During Christmas parties and get-togethers, it was really common for families from all sorts of economic backgrounds to wild out and go heavy with the preparation. They would often include all kinds of dishes and make sure that entire snack bars, dessert bars, and tables were filled with all kinds of stuff. It was a common sight to see stuffed mushrooms sitting next to a fat roasted turkey and some garlic bread. The reason they work so well is because they already are infused with garlic, and sometimes even shallots. This means they work pretty well with the savory flavor that you will find in most Christmas dishes, not counting dessert. It warms you up perfectly for sweeter meals, although it is definitely more popular with adults. If you get the chance this Christmas, try out this vintage 70s classic. Sausage gravy over toasted bread is a traditional Southern breakfast that for a long time was the heart and soul of the South, especially in places like Texas. You should not confuse this with country gravy because there is a stark difference between the two. See, country gravy does not have the juicy, mouth-watering, glorious addition of animal fat involved in the process. Sausage gravy, on the other hand, uses loose pork sausages, and once the meat is rendered, it takes the fat and mixes it with flour to make the roux and thicken the gravy. You pair that up with some perfectly golden brown toasted bread, and you are in for a world of culinary delight. The best part was that you could amp up the smoky sausage flavor by just adding more sausage to the gravy or keep it toned down for a milder taste. Either way, an incredibly yummy and economical breakfast. French onion soup gained popularity thanks to the dedicated efforts of Julia Child. Her cookbook, affectionately titled Mastering the Art of French Cooking, due to her love of French cuisine and what it did for food in America, had this dish as one of its classics. When people think about who made this dish rest on the tip of your tongue, or one of the ideas your mind flashes to immediately when asked about lunch plans, people seem to think of her first. Even on her television show, there would be actions of her whipping up some delectable French onion soup. The recipe was based on caramelized onions in this rich, beefy broth, and Julia Child was not the only one who saw the appeal. During the Kennedy administration, French food in general saw a big increase in fame and national interest thanks to the Kennedys' never-ending appreciation for French food. With a history as rich as the flavors you will find when you take that first sip, it is no wonder this became such a trendy choice for Christmas, though it does not have the same pull today with the people. Here is one for our fans who love ranch-style eggs and cannot go without them. Huevos rancheros was an incredible dish that would be served on Mexican rural farms and was very popular in Latin American communities. It was a conventional egg dish made in the style of traditional large mid-morning fare. You can keep it simple and traditional with some fried eggs served on a charred corn or flour tortilla base with a spicy salsa, or keep experimenting. There are lots of options to play around with too, like Mexican-style rice, guacamole, and avocado. This takes a bit more effort than anything else on the list so far, but if you are willing to put in the work, you will find an egg dish like none you have ever had before. Ciampino is a dish that not many Americans know about today, but one that had a massive chunk of the spotlight in the 70s and some pretty strong roots in the country overall. It was a deep tradition of the West Coast and Italian-American communities. Italian fishers that would come to San Francisco in the 1800s would add their catches of the day to this tomato and wine stew, and it eventually grew into its own thing, a niche stew that quickly captivated more and more communities. Soon, restaurants hopped on the bandwagon, and by the time of the 1900s, the Pacific Northwest and beyond had taken to Ciampino pretty well. In the 1970s, Ciampino was a must-have at Christmas, especially for those looking to add a more coastal or seafood theme to their holiday meal. Olives might not make a comeback anytime soon in today's world, but they will return on the list with egg and olive sandwiches. Like we said, olives were starting to get really hot as the ideal sandwich topping. Adaptable, flexible, and cheap is all you want out of an accessory to your sandwich. Like those fancy earrings that go perfect with your dress, olives and eggs went together like a Cupid-certified match made in heaven. People went wild around the mid-1970s for hard-boiled eggs and salted olives in their sandwich, green or black. Black olives got a bit more traction with eggs though, whereas greens synergized better with peanut butter. Would you ever try a sandwich that consists only of an egg and a fruit? By the way, You did know olives are fruits, right? Peanut butter and bacon sandwiches might be a little ironic considering what we just talked about, but one thing they most definitely are is downright delicious. We know you are imagining it as you watch the video, and that is okay because, honestly, same. Crispy fried strips of bacon lathered in thick peanut butter are enough to get anyone's mind going. In the 70s, peanut butter and bacon sandwiches were the standard American breakfast, and they may have even started the stereotype of the US being a nation of bacon heads. When you get to the plates of every household in 50 states, you can claim a piece of culture for yourself too. Peanut butter and bacon sandwiches remain in the Food Hall of Fame, and there was nothing like a fresh sandwich off the pan in the 70s. Corned beef and cabbage, a classic St. Patrick's Day dish, but did you know it was once a common comfort food? Known as salt beef in some Commonwealth countries, this American-Irish dish was a hearty protein source and a staple on the table during the 17th through the early 20th centuries. It was tinned along with sugar and spices during World War I and World War II when fresh meat was rationed. Cabbage brought in the right amount of nutrients, making this meal not just delicious, but also a healthy choice. While still popular in some circles, corned beef and cabbage aren't half as famous as it once was. But if you're ever up for some good old-fashioned cooking, there are recipes for this one all over the internet, and they're pretty easy to follow. And finally, we have stuffed lamb heart. This dish is another example of our ancestors' resourceful use of every part of an animal. This meaty meal also goes around with the unique nickname of love in disguise in many parts of England. While the origins are unclear, it first emerged in Kettner's Book of the Table in 1887 and took over Great Britain. The heart was cleaned, stuffed with breadcrumbs, herbs, and sometimes even minced meat, and then roasted or braised. This was a nutrient-rich meal which was a fulfilling delicacy after a long day of hard work. Though it's rarely seen today, lamb hearts are still common in many local dishes in South Asian countries. Who needs any introduction to the irresistible charm of spending the wintry holiday months with a basket of freshly baked garlic bread? Whether you order them from Pizza Hut or get them made in your home, garlic bread makes any Christmas plan that much more delicious. Let's get into the history of garlic bread in America a little too. So we know that it has been served in restaurants since the 1950s, and it would pretty much exclusively be paired with pasta dishes. Stuff like lasagna and spaghetti were common to serve some garlic bread with, but it was not until it became commercially manufactured in the 70s that the craze took off. Kohl's Quality Foods first made their version of accessible frozen garlic bread in Muskegon, Michigan, and we have to say they struck gold. The brand was massively popular, and it kicked garlic bread up a notch. Now people would eat it as is minus any main dish to go with. A basic two-ingredient combo like meat spreads and cheese would continue making their mark with dishes like salami and cream cheese sandwiches. Salami itself was something that Italian-American communities heavily popularized in America around the early 1900s. Restaurants would take the trend and turn it into a surefire facet of American cooking in the 70s with easy and accessible ideas like salami and cream cheese sandwiches. If it works in restaurants, then the next step to making it a long-lasting memory is to make it simple enough for people to eat at home. Cream cheese, some salami, and white bread understood the assignment perfectly, and despite fading away later on, were a beloved sandwich. If you had any Italian family or were in a primarily European neighborhood, you could definitely expect to catch a whiff of these around the block. Maybe cheeses used to be stronger then? Either way, we would love to try this sandwich from the 1970s. Another thing that was an incredible classic during the 70s was baked ham with a brown sugar glaze. We cannot express how much the local townsfolk in places like Oregon and Alaska would love to make this, and it was especially popular in the South of America. People already had an obsession with ham, and the 70s was pushing it to the max, with things like Spam becoming even more popular. The days of baked ham were also not that far away, and retro baked ham recipes involve brown sugar glazes with maraschino cherries to add literally the sweetest cherry on top to your perfect winter dessert. Some recipes even include ginger ale, creating a sweet and savory dish that never fails to impress guests. Christmas morning coffee cake was a popular recipe to see even in magazines and cooking catalogs like Red Book, And that goes doubly true for the 1970s. Did you know that the trend is not strictly American, though? Back in the 1870s, a whole 100 years before the time we are discussing, German and Dutch immigrants started to come into America. Along with them, they brought their coffee cakes and all the traditional family recipes that had been passed on. Soon, in New York, New Jersey, and Delaware, the morning cake movement started off strong, and 100 years later, despite no one knowing its foreign history, it became a staple of Christmas culture. There was something so awfully warm and cozy about starting off a Christmas morning with a perfect hot coffee cake. Besides just using traditional flour, eggs, and butter for pancakes, people back then also enjoyed making buckwheat pancakes, which were less common. These would, as the name implies, involve buckwheat being used in the cooking process, and the outcome of it was actually pretty delectable. People would love the nutty texture that these pancakes would provide, and everyone was always looking for a way to freshen up their favorite American breakfast anyway. Buckwheat pancakes with a chocolate spread or butter made for the perfect breakfast to start your day right. The extra dose of fiber kept you full and energized throughout the day. It was common to have these pancakes with a side of sausages or English muffins, and if you recreate this today, you'll find a comforting breakfast experience that you might consider keeping in your weekly rotation. First inspired by Count Pavel Alexandrovich Stroganoff in the 1800s, this Russian dish made its way to Christmas dinner tables during the 1970s across all of America, and for good reason. A good crock-pot beef stroganoff can set the entire family on fire, skipping all the usual pretense conversation that tends to take place during Christmas and going right to the pigging out part. The dish itself got some serious motion in the 1950s and 60s, but it got super popular during the 70s, especially in North America. During that period, you could not go to a single household without seeing somebody laying out a fat plate of stroganoff. Cubes of beef are served in a rich, creamy sauce with meat stewed in mushroom soup, Worcestershire sauce, and noodles. It sounds like a dream, and it tastes like one too. If you want to get real vintage for this Christmas, you know what part of our culinary golden days to revisit. When we talk about meringue snowballs, your head might go to shaved ice with flavorings shaped into a ball, but these little balls are in a league of their own entirely. These are made out of small cookie fillings and typically look like hollow domes. A small peek at the inside reveals an entire roller coaster of flavors to make your Christmas sparkle, and we are talking about a real heavy-hitting sugar show. Stuff like lemon jelly, candied chestnut, vanilla cream, and hazelnut praline. Pretty much a Baskin-Robbins shop into a delectable snowball. These are also pretty low calorically, which makes them the perfect thing to binge on while you get your holiday cheer-up. In the 1970s, meringue was the hottest thing in town, a flamboyant dish that people would order constantly at restaurants, with over-the-top presentation and flair to add onto a dish that needed no sales pitch to get you seated. What we cannot get are chicken salad and grape sandwiches. Seriously, what was the vision here, and who signed off on it? Honestly, the most action this dish saw was when it was the weekend, and there were only leftovers and some odd assortment of fruits at home. Places like Rhode Island still had a fan base for the flavors this sandwich had, especially in early 1970s, and the highlight here really was the chicken salad. Not something you would have to enter a food coma, but definitely something you want if you are counting calories. Health-wise, this was probably the best sandwich you could get back then, when the alternatives were grease-loaded behemoths or experimental train wrecks. Most of the lovers of chicken salad and grape sandwiches dwindled a lot over the years, and now it is just a memory. We're back to the basics with this one as boiled mutton. Who doesn't love some boiled mutton? This dish exists in almost every part of the world, with every culture having its own unique variation. The mutton was often placed in a large pot with root vegetables like carrots, turnips, and potatoes, slow-cooked until the meat fell apart and the vegetables were tender. This dish was the perfect meal to warm your insides on a cold winter day. Boiled mutton emerged as a common meal in medieval Europe, especially for the lower classes where it was cooked only using meat and water. Now, this one is slowly becoming more and more outdated as people usually go for more flavorful meats. But with the rise of Chinese hot pots, instant boiled mutton might just make a comeback. Despite how they have become known as Christmas meatballs, they actually consist more of pudding than anything else. Never thought a food could catfish, but here we are. Anyway, this is a pretty standard Christmas dish to go for. Things like this are always there for dessert or whenever you would visit your grandma for Christmas, but the idea of making them actual meatballs started blooming in the 70s and is probably why we have actual protein-filled Christmas snacks instead of pudding now. It seems that people realized you could make a turkey meatball just as good as any plum or figgy pudding and went with it. Not sure if they knew they were creating a trend that would sweep every household in the vicinity. Breakfast burritos are something that we still have regularly in today's modern world, and the trend has continued steadily despite being introduced all the way back in the 1970s in New Mexico. You go south enough, you will only see bacon and eggs, whereas the opposite end has its fair share of tortilla-based goodness. New Mexico was a state where American, Mexican, and Latin cultures met and melted together in one pot, and we got things like the breakfast burrito out of it. Bacon, eggs, and vegetables in a tortilla with salsa poured over or served on the side as a dip was one of the best parts about being alive in the 70s, back when they didn't hold back on the spice. Buttermilk pancakes were a great alternative to buckwheat pancakes if you got tired of those, and this is for all the people that love having a much sweeter kick to start their day with. If you have never been familiar with the magic that some simple buttermilk can add to your pancakes, then you need to get yourself acquainted. Grandpas in the 90s would often specifically look for buttermilk in stores, and housewives would have it tacked onto the grocery list despite it costing a little bit more than your more basic ingredients. Especially if it was a guarantee that the grandkids and family were coming over this week, then you could not avoid splurging a little more on stuff like this. Whether it is the 90s or the 2020s, nothing beats pancakes made straight from your grandparents' hand, and that goes triple for buttermilk ones. Pigs in a blanket have long been a staple of Christmas breakfasts, lunches, and dinners alike, especially for parties and neighborhood feasts, and it makes a lot of sense when you think about how well they work as a snack. Food that helps a conversation flow better as both of you chat and munch works amazing for holiday celebrations, and nothing fits that bill quite like pigs in a blanket do. They've been a sight at many snack bars, but the very first time America saw the recipe for pigs in a blanket was in the Cooking for Kids cookbook that Betty Crocker wrote in 1957. During the 70s especially, they were a sensation across the Midwest, and even if people would not have them for holidays, they would make it as a casual snack anyway. Sardine and mustard sandwiches are as basic as they sound and much better than you might initially give them credit for. Be realistic and think about a post-Depression era America where a lot of neighborhoods and homes were still reeling from the effects. Dollars could buy a bit more and went back to their usual strength, but everything was a bit touch and go for a while, and dishes like sardine and mustard sandwiches were the cure. Even more attractive than the taste was the price of this beauty, because for about $1.50 you had yourself a solid meal. Many labor workers, like your friendly neighborhood forklift or dock workers, might remember eating these during their lunch breaks. People would usually spice it up with other vegetables, toppings, and peppers to make a proper feast out of a cheap thrill. And we would like to join the fun too. The 70s were all about their fondue bars, fondue sections at menus, restaurants that specialized in it, and the infamous American fondue parties that took over the nation. Most homes had ceramic pots that were electric and came with 6 or 8 forks, and this was all for fondue preparation, as when Christmas rolled around, the last person you wanted to be was someone with no fondue in their home. Even in the Black Friday sales after Thanksgiving, people would go insane for those pots. Fondue was already getting a lot of traction in the 60s, but it peaked in popularity during the 70s thanks to it becoming sort of a dessert hobby for people to engage in. Kind of like how today we go out for hot pot as a social outing as well as a dinner experience, people would go out for fondue, trying it from different places and picking out their favorites. So we all have not had a Christmas go by without some kind of stuffing there, especially if it was roasted turkey with stuffing. The trend started somewhere in the 1860s when Thanksgiving became more and more popular, and as a result, people started to have annual dinners more often. Soon, they began serving stuffed roasted turkeys to accommodate large gatherings, a tradition that carried over to Christmas. Back in those days, it was a lot harder for your family to just up and leave post-dinner. If people were coming, then they would be spending the holiday season together. And that is why people opted for these big meals that could serve up an entire family. There was nothing that did that quite like a roasted turkey with a nice stuffing to open up. Shrimp cocktail similarly got its big break during the 70s, when people would start to have it in bars or as a drink to wash off all the Christmas food. Alongside stroganoff and onion soup, it is one of the Christmas dishes from the 70s that has made a bit of a comeback, even if it is still far away from its golden days when everybody had a serving of shrimp cocktail. This appetizer involved tiger prawns that were boiled in their shell and then peeled. It had its biggest use like this tangy, sweet and savory hors d'oeuvre, and this lasted from the 60s to the 80s. As mentioned earlier, it has made a bit of a comeback in harborside restaurants, but its days as a household staple disappeared with the 1970s. Homemade recipes are truly something that all people should know. Was there any recipe that stood out to you? Comment down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Creamed codfish, on the other hand, was something that America did not get too familiar with until the early 20th century. Traditionally, dreamed codfish would always involve some salted cod that had been soaked, which was then flaked and prepared in a creamy white sauce. People would usually opt for milk-based sauces, so they had a pretty thick, warm, and flavorful meal. Salted codfish became especially popular because of how cheap the overall preparation was. Plus, before refrigeration became really popular, people would always have salted cod lying around because cod was really easy to preserve. People have come a lot farther in terms of what they can preserve and the meats we have day to day now, so cod fell out of fashion. Molded cranberry salad was something that was a bit more popular at Thanksgiving originally, but soon became a dish that would stay around for many Christmases to come. This refreshing side takes cranberries and mixes them with dried fruits and marshmallows, and it would all be held together using Jell-O or a gelatine base. Basically, it was some pretty fancy Jell-O salad. After a long, hard day of feasting at the many homes you visit during the Christmas season, some well-deserved cranberry relaxation is very much in order. People loved how molded cranberry salads were not heavy at all, but rather just the thing to cleanse your appetite and get you back on the table. Fatback. Just the name sounds delicious, right? Wrong. Fatback is basically just a slab of pure pig fat. This cut of pork was often used to flavor dishes or rendered into lard for cooking. In times of scarcity, fatback was a valuable ingredient because it added flavor and richness to otherwise bland meals. You could fry it up to make crispy bits or use the rendered fat for cooking just about anything. Fatback is the unsung hero of many Southern dishes, providing that extra bit of flavor that makes everything taste better. However, in today's world of lean meats and health-conscious eating, fatback hasn't quite kept up. It's the kind of thing that makes dietitians shudder, but still holds a nostalgic place in the hearts of many. While it's not as popular as it once was, fatback remains a key ingredient in traditional Southern cooking, and for good reason, it's delicious. Potted meat is a canned meat product that was a staple in many households during tough times. Made from a mix of meats, including beef and pork, it's ground into a paste and seasoned. It's often used as a spread on crackers or bread, making it a quick and easy snack or meal component. Potted meat has a long shelf life, which makes it perfect for stocking pantries during uncertain times. It's not exactly gourmet fare, but it got the job done. However, in today's era of fresh whole foods, potted meat has fallen out of favor. It's the kind of thing you might find in a survival kit or on a camping trip, but not something you'd serve at a dinner party. Still, for those who grew up with it, potted meat holds a special place in the pantry of memories. General Mills introduced Sir Grapefellow and Baron von Redberry, the history books of American cereal, during 1972, and these even had World War I and II packaging. These cereals were incredibly popular, with most U.S. kids waking up across the nation to enjoy them, even though it was torture not getting those last 5 minutes of sleep. Even adults could enjoy a bowl when there was nothing else in the pantry, and you just had to quiet your stomach. These cereals rival all the big names that were already present in the market and wreaking havoc, such as Quake and Frankenberry. And despite being loyal to many of those kids, definitely changed their minds the first time a bowl of this came out. Much to their sadness in 1975, it got discontinued and has not made any noise since in the market. Young's also hit culinary and financial gold when they came up with Findus crispy pancakes, perhaps one of their most successful product lines yet. These were replaced with Chef's classic and original Pancake Co. But so many people outright rejected that. Talk about product loyalty, huh? Even today, there is quite an active and loud community on the internet advocating daily with every bit of their bandwidth to bring this back. We get it too, since these were such a cheap and affordable way to have some absolutely fluffy and delicious pancakes. Early in the morning or late at night, none of that mattered when there was no batter to deal with and only joy to have. It is quite sad that the best of things often get taken away from us, that too around their peak years. Another item on this list is head cheese. Don't let the name fool you. There's no cheese in head cheese. Instead, it's a terrine or meat jelly made from the flesh of a pig or calf's head. Sounds appetizing, right? Variations of head cheese exist throughout Europe and elsewhere, with differences in preparation and ingredients. A version pickled with vinegar is known as sauce. Head cheese was a way to use every part of the animal, especially during times when food was scarce. It's a dish that's rich in flavor and history, but not exactly a crowd pleaser in modern times. While you might still find it in some specialty delis, it's not the kind of thing you'd bring to a potluck without a disclaimer. Pot liquor is the savory, nutrient-rich liquid left over after boiling greens like collards, kale, or mustard greens. This flavorful broth was often sopped up with cornbread or drank straight from the bowl. It's packed with vitamins and minerals, making it a staple in many Southern households. In a world obsessed with bone broth and kale smoothies, you'd think pot liquor would be all the rage. But for some reason, it hasn't quite made the leap to the mainstream. Maybe it's the name, or maybe it's just too old-fashioned for today's palate. Either way, pot liquor is a delicious, nutritious throwback to a time when people didn't let anything go to waste. It's a dish that deserves a comeback, even if just for its health benefits. Keebler's fudge-flavored Magic Millies were a trick-or-treat item, so you can imagine how the sales spiked for this chocolatey snack during Halloween. Think of these as ice cream sandwich cakes, except a lot more reasonably priced and not at all something you can only have once or twice a week because it just would not work with your monthly schedule money-wise any other way. The lovely thing about a snack, food tradition, or dish that works well within the mass class's capacity during the times is that the product instantly becomes massively accessible. Magic Millies were definitely a prime example of this, as during the height of their fame in the 70s, you could not tear a kid away from these. Nabisco's Swiss cheese crackers were another popular thing to chow down on while you were hungry or waiting on a proper meal, and they picked up a lot of steam towards the end of the 70s and the beginning of the 80s. These crackers are used in sandwiches, nachos, as a crumb topping, and a lot more. They came in this bright red and yellow box, which, by the way, did you know the color yellow is supposed to trigger your hunger? That is why McDonald's always has it going on. Anyways, the Nabisco crackers came in some other flavors too, but the Swiss cheese one was the one that had most middle-class Americans in a hypnotic trance, and we can definitely see why. Bologna-like luncheon meat was an affordable cold cut that America loved due to its affordability and customizability. Unlike boring sandwiches, bologna boats were a fun and appealing way to feed children during lunchtime, as the shape of bologna boats attracted younger audiences. What is so appealing about the shape, you might ask? Well, chefs hollowed out bologna slices and shaped them into an oval that would hold ingredients like cheese or relish. The slices were then baked to ensure bologna boats would hold their shape when being consumed. A fun addition lunch across the state eventually became a forgotten lunch, as the preparation time for bologna boats was too time-consuming. Home chefs needed a quick and suitable lunch to make, and bologna boats were not meeting the requirement anymore. Liverwurst and onion sandwiches were some of the least popular lunches introduced by local shops as a lunch option. Liverwurst was a variant of liver sausages that were cooked and paired with onions served on rye bread. Sounds unappealing, right? Well, that was the general consensus of everyone who ate this food in America. You would wonder why a simple 3-ingredient sandwich did not gain significant traction as a lunch staple, and the answer was easy. Liverwurst had a strong, overpowering taste that did not appease the taste palates of the common man. This was especially common in New York, where local delis started removing liverwurst sandwiches from their menu because of how disliked they were. Today, the sandwich is barely available in any state, and it would be rare to find a home chef cooking liverwurst sandwiches for their lunch tables. Journey cakes, Johnny cakes, whatever ancient name you know them by, this is another example of Americans trying to keep the love of sausages alive by putting new spins on dishes. Sometimes they were new ones. Sometimes they were ones that already existed for a while. A lot of people were pretty familiar with Johnny cakes already, but the sausage version was something that was made by the people of North America. They started off with the indigenous communities over there, and ground corn was a big part of their daily routine. They started using ground corn to make these flatbreads, which were the basic breakfasts in North America. Eventually, farmers started getting their hands on a bit more pork than before, and thus sausages were brought into the mix. It's really a great lunch or breakfast, doesn't bloat you, doesn't leave you running close to empty still, and feels great while tasting delicious. People kind of debate where the name came from though. There wasn't really a Johnny that made this dish popular, nor was there any kind of historic or iconic journey that it was popular with. I guess maybe you could call it an offshoot of Jonakin, which was a New England term that was used for cornmeal cakes and the like, but then again, it's not really the same. Either way, what we're concerned about is how it takes a sausage and makes it shine. It didn't start out this way, as in the North it was really just more corn than sausages. When it hit New England, it was a breakfast meal that would come with molasses or syrup. In the South, you'd instead have cornmeal pancakes, and over time, more and more breakfast items kept getting tacked onto the dish until we hit sausages. Fast food gained a lot of popularity in America during the 1940s, so it is not surprising that chili cheese dogs are next on our list. Hot dogs topped with homemade chili and melted cheese were sold at just about every roadside cart to people looking for a quick lunch. Best for workers who had short breaks, chili cheese dogs were the perfect balance of spices and flavors that would satisfy their hunger. In fact, the common man took such a liking to these hot dogs that several variations of a chili cheese dog recipe was released to the public in cooking sections of the daily newspaper. Soon after, chili cheese dogs were a comfort lunch served at family tables, with each house adding whichever toppings they preferred. You will not see this food served during family lunches anymore, because hot dogs today are reduced to their value as being a roadside food. Going back to hearty lunch meals, pot roast is a family lunch that was made in homes using whichever ingredient was available at the time. Historically, pot roast can be traced back to Europe, where peasants and working-class homes regularly ate this lunch. Made using tougher cuts of meat and commonly available vegetables, America adopted this recipe as their own during the Great Depression. Economic perils allowed for pot roast to be a part of lunch tables, as people would use just about any vegetables and protein they could find. The most popular recipe was slow-cooked beef with carrots and potatoes topped with gravy. With the economic situation in the States improving, pot roast lost significant popularity amongst consumers, as necessity was no longer something they had to factor into their cooking. Sausage balls are actually something that you can vibe with a lot easier. It's also yet another thing that we got as a result of the war and how it handled food throughout the nation. I don't think the government ever saw this kind of culinary innovation coming when they decided to go all in on rationing things and making canned food popular, but you never know what goes on in the mind of a good chef. Kind of a testament to human creativity, right? You don't have to give all the credit to them, though. General Mills also helped out a lot here. They're the ones that made Bisquick, which was this 1931 mix of baking powder, shortening, and flour. It helped in a lot of dishes, but for sausage balls, it was a key player. Though it's not the shape you're used to seeing them in, it's still the same old friend that's gotten you through several awful evening shifts and long dreaded days at university. Anyone knows that the place of sausages in American culture, whether we're talking about getting a hot dog off a street stall or prepping a proper dog on the grill at home, it's something that a lot of citizens just consider a thing you know and do. Sausage balls were a way to keep the momentum for sausages going, as everything could use variation once in a while. You take Bisquick, which gives a ready-made mix and gives a solid base for the sausage balls, and cheese, which holds the shape together and gives it that comfort factor. So your idea of a salad is probably a lot of greens, some vinegar, a bit of French dressing here and there. You know, things still within the bounds of sanity, of rationality. I mean, salads are supposed to be the poster boys for healthy eating, aren't they? So, what do you and I make of? You might be familiar with bologna because of its popularity as a deli meat today, but fried bologna sandwiches were in a league of their own back in the 1960s. Categorized as a Southern classic, fried bologna sandwich was brought into the USA by German immigrants. The sandwich was mostly popular as a school lunch, as cafeterias would serve up hot fried bologna slices on bread with cheese to students during lunch hour. While school lunches had a reputation for being average food, the fried bologna sandwich was exempted from such notions. Children loved when fried bologna was on the school cafeteria menu, and parents were happy that their children were finally content with their school lunches. Fried bologna sandwiches remained a popular lunch choice until schools shifted to foods that could be cooked in batches instead of sandwiches that had to be individually assembled. Make way for more sandwiches, as sardine sandwiches are next on our list. A fairly easy lunch to cook up, sardine sandwiches used canned sardines that were mashed and mixed with mayonnaise or mustard to create a umami-flavored sandwich spread. Like we previously mentioned, seafood was getting expensive and families needed alternatives like canned fish to survive the lack of seafood options. Home chefs turned towards canned sardines to prepare a delicious sandwich with just a few ingredients that were laying around the house. Surprisingly, the sandwich was well received by the masses, and it became a go-to seafood food that you could cook up during family lunches. Unfortunately, sardine sandwiches suffered the same fate as tuna macaroni and cheese, as the prices of fresh fish decreased in the States due to increased fish farming, leading to tinned fish becoming less popular in homes. Hardtack, also known as ship's biscuit, is a simple, hard biscuit made from flour and water. It was a staple for sailors, soldiers, and pioneers because it had a long shelf life and was easy to transport. The downside? It was so hard that it could break your teeth if you weren't careful. Hardtack was often soaked in water or soup to soften it up before eating. It wasn't exactly tasty, but it provided the necessary calories to survive long journeys or tough times. Today, hardtack is more of a historical curiosity than a pantry staple. It's the kind of thing you might try once for the experience, but it's not something you'd want to eat regularly. It's a relic of a time when food was more about survival than enjoyment. Scrapple was the typical everything but the oink dish. This Pennsylvania Dutch classic was made from pork scraps. Yes, that includes everything from the snout to the tail, combined with cornmeal and flour, then formed into a loaf. It is also known by the Pennsylvania Dutch name panhas. Scrapples and panhas were commonly considered ethnic foods of the Pennsylvania Dutch, including the Mennonites and Amish. Scraps of meat left over from butchering not otherwise used or sold were made into scrapples to avoid waste. It's like your grandma's meatloaf with a whole lot more mystery meat. Scrapple had a love it or hate it reputation. For some, it was a comfort food that reminded them of home. For others, it was a mysterious meat block they'd rather avoid. It's definitely an acquired taste, one that has not quite made it to mainstream breakfast menus. And don't even get me started on the texture. I'll leave a little to your imagination. As people went across the 20th century exploring different avenues of cooking and expanded their horizon, they eventually would find themselves stumbling upon pecan-coated pork loin roasts. America always enjoyed a good old-fashioned loin roast, but even the best of things can sometimes get a little old and need a new spin on them. Pecan coatings were just the thing for that dilemma and brought loin roasts back in style as if they never ever left. Particularly in North America, where pecans are a natural resource, and in the South once again, this kind of loin roast was a Christmas speciality. The idea was to take classic dishes and reimagine them with easy day-to-day ingredients. We have to say, home cooks really outdid themselves with this one. What was initially just only regionally popular became a wildfire spreading across America that lots of people remember fondly today too. A fruity and healthy alternative to your usual Coca-Cola or Dew with a taste that put you in mentally in a relaxing tangerine garden with fresh oranges, High C was a really sick drink that launched in the 70s and 80s. The best phase they probably had was when they paired up with Ghostbusters for a promotion drink, which ended up being the High-C Ecto Cooler drink. It was an all-green drink that was kept in the themes of the movie, and fans responded pretty well to it. A lot of health articles would hate it and say it was terrible for kids, but that did not stop them from chugging them down relentlessly. Maybe the lesson is moderation? Either way, High-C wanted to keep the arrangement going just that way, and actually kept this line of their drinks steady up until the 2010s, when it got discontinued. There's a lot of online discourse and support for the drink to come back since it was a massive fan favorite, not just for loyal Ghostbuster savants, but your average young adult too. It was a nice fruit juice, and it did not feel as bad as chugging a couple of cans of fizzy and in bulk, pricey soda. We sure would love to try it since it seems pretty citrusy. Corned beef hash with eggs was popularized in the States after World War II when rationing meat was a common practice. One of state's biggest food processing companies, the Hormel Company, claims they bought corned beef hash to America in the 1950s and jump-started the invention of corned beef hash recipes. Since acquiring fresh meat was getting harder in the post-war era, people used corned beef to create a hash lunch. The recipe was simple. All you had to do was dice corned beef, mix it with potatoes and onions, then add a poached or fried egg on top. Corned beef was not really a fan favorite as the peculiar taste did not appeal to many people. This meant that as soon as necessity was not driving people's cooking, they forgot all about corned beef hash with eggs. If we move on over to the South for a bit, we're going to find that these people dearly love their potato salads. Who can blame them? Region to region, there's no family that doesn't have a deep, intimate relationship with the potato. Arguably one of the finest things to ever come out of Mother Nature, and especially when you make a shout hallelujah potato salad. Before you ask in the comments, I'm just as lost as you on where they came up with the name. I mean, maybe they were Jeff Buckley fans? Side note, I really hope you get the reefer either way. This salad really did want to make you yell hallelujah, so there is that. It just isn't very often that you come across a salad that has it all, you know? The taste, the binge-eating potential, the perfect texture, and the health benefits. This one takes hard-boiled eggs, scallions, paprika, mayo, and potatoes, and a pretty tangy dressing. This is one of those dishes that German immigrants first brought over with them, and I'm personally glad they brought the best of their kitchens. All in all, if you're trying to find a new way to have a delicious salad, this is definitely the best thing on the market. It'll get you feeling fuller and healthier, and it's a lot better than a greasy street-side sandwich which your doctor may be recommending you to eat a lot less of. Speaking of comfort food that doesn't ever really get old, let's talk about Big Mama's egg pie. Funny name, right? A lot of people think the title came from the rural South. There, the mom of the family was often always in charge of deciding how the family would eat, a lot more so than other communities. They became known affectionately as Big Mamas, and it was a pretty cute honorific for Southern Black families. That's how they'd refer to the grandma or the eldest woman in the family who would cook all the delicious things you guys grew up on, like this pie here. When the Great Migration happened and those communities first flocked to America, they brought over a slew of family-friendly recipes with them, this egg custard pie being one of them. I didn't really get it either until I found out the history behind egg pie and how it's a staple of Southern homes. Basically, if you live up there, you've been around the block with this pie a few times. The custard eggs really need to be whisked properly to get it right though, but that's something grandmas, or as this dish would refer to them, Big Mamas, were pretty well acquainted with. The best thing about custard pies was probably how easy it was to make them, which is also how they ended up getting so popular in the first palace. The ingredients were something you'd find around anywhere, really. You don't get a gray hair cooking food for a family on a yearly basis and come out of it with no tricks with basic things. I don't really know what the trend was, assuming that mothers as a collective were tied to these dishes. But mamas, as long as we are speaking about Christmas appetizers and things that go great during a conversation, classic cornbread dressing is probably the holy grail of dishes like that. It was already something that was really popular in Southern American cuisine and states, and that was a habit America mostly picked up during the 19th century. Cornbread itself became pretty popular after the Civil War when corn was so cheap that it became mass-consumed. You might not know this, but even in the South, a lot of classic cornbread dishes dressing ideas were first popularized and tried in African American cooking communities. It was a bare-bones recipe with just cornbread crumbs originally mixed with some broth, but now it includes things like sausages, meats, onions, and herbs. Definitely one of the tastiest appetizers out there that we would love more of in today's Christmas scene. Hoppin' John is a Southern classic made with black-eyed peas, rice, and pork, often flavored with onions, garlic, and spices. This dish was traditionally eaten on New Year's Day for good luck and prosperity, with the peas representing coins and the greens often served alongside representing dollars. Some recipes use ham hock, fatback, country sausage, or smoked turkey parts instead of bacon. A few use green peppers or vinegar and spices. Hoppin' John was a hearty, comforting dish that's perfect for feeding a crowd on a budget. It was a one-pot wonder that brings together simple ingredients in a delicious way. However, despite its tasty credentials, Hoppin' John hasn't quite made it to the top of the culinary charts. It's a dish steeped in tradition, but not one that has a big presence in today's trendy food scene. That said, it's still a beloved dish in the South and a tasty way to start the new year. Okay, if you have a light stomach, this next one's not for you. Chicken feet. You heard that right? Now, we're getting into some real survival food territory. Chicken feet might sound like a strange choice for a meal, but in many cultures, they're considered a delicacy. These little feet are often used to make rich, flavorful broths and soups. The high collagen content gives the broth a silky texture that's perfect for sipping on a cold day. However, chicken feet aren't exactly the most popular menu item in the West, or at least anymore. They were big back when people had to eat whatever they could find, like the tough days of the Great Depression. But in today's modern world, chicken feet are a big no thank you. They're a bit bony and can be a challenge to eat, which might be why they haven't caught on like, say, chicken wings. But for those in the know, they're a tasty, nutrient-rich part of the chicken that's worth trying at least once. Just don't expect to see them in your local fast food chain anytime soon. Next up, we have cicadas. Yes, you heard that right. Cicadas. These insects were eaten during times of food scarcity, offering a protein-rich snack when other food sources were limited. Cicadas are actually quite nutritious, with a nutty flavor that's often compared to almonds or shrimp. Eating insects might sound strange to some, but it's a common practice in many cultures around the world. Cicadas, in particular, were a seasonal delicacy in certain regions, collected and cooked in various ways. In modern times, the idea of eating bugs hasn't quite caught on in the mainstream Western diet, although there's a growing interest in edible insects as a sustainable protein source. Cicadas may not have stood the test of time as a popular food, but they remain a fascinating part of culinary history. With a slogan that charmed people, pizza spins claimed to be all of the true delicious pizza flavor in a munchy, crunchy, and mouth-sized snack. Pizza spins are the perfect start to this topic because the taste holds true to every part of their promise of an authentic pizza-tasting snack. People were surprised at how a crunchy pizza-shaped pinwheel snack could imitate the taste so well when this came out in 1968. Over the next 5 years, it was so popular everybody would be buying dozens of bags at a local mart or getting them ordered. Plus, their packaging was pretty neat too. It had all Italian colors to pay respect to the heritage of the pizza. They were made up of much of the ingredients used in actual pizza too, such as Parmesan cheese and tomatoes. Plus, many of the spices you'd find in a regular pizza were in there too, and some pepper. So all in all, they were really the best snack you could get, and they just cost a few cents. Now, if only they did not get discontinued in 1975. Yet another sandwich made using cold cuts were head cheese sandwiches. Where the sandwich originated from is unclear. However, food critics trace head cheese or meat jelly back to Europe. Beware, as this cold cut is made from unusual ingredients, including the flesh and meat from the heads of calves or pigs. Yes, that is where head cheese gets the name from. This cold cut is paired with mustard and pickles, then served cold on a slice of bread as a lunch food for those looking for an interesting sandwich. European immigrants brought head cheese with them to America, and much like the liverwurst sandwich, head cheese was not well received by locals. As the meat jelly was introduced in markets, many locals bought it as the price was economical and they could try out a new dish. But the taste was so unlikable that people decided to not make this lunch a regular food, and head cheese was effectively forgotten. Canned food was seemingly a fan favorite back in the day, as SpaghettiOs are the next forgotten lunch we want to bring back. Campbell's Soup Company took notice of the popularity pasta was gaining as a lunch food in the 1960s and invented SpaghettiOs. Sold for cheap in supermarkets, the dish was a basic tomato sauce with circular pasta rings instead of spaghetti noodles. SpaghettiOs were convenient and budget-friendly. Thus, they rapidly became a lunch staple for many people who needed a quick meal. Parents preferred giving their children SpaghettiOs because they were less messy, and children enjoyed the circular shape. Eventually, SpaghettiOs became a forgotten lunch as newer, easy-to-make lunches, like Kraft macaroni and spaghetti, came along. People simply did not enjoy the taste of canned spaghetti and moved on from the iconic SpaghettiOs. Pickled pig feet might make you cringe right now, but they were quite the lunch in the southern USA. Simply put, the lunch was a plate full of pig feet that had been pickled in vinegar and spices. Some might have eaten pickled pig feet as part of larger meals like soups or stews, but it was not uncommon for people to snack on them as it is. Historically, pig's feet used to be considered an upper-class delicacy, but with the commercialization of processed food, pickled pig feet became available at local supermarkets. This opened the delicacy up to several people who had never thought of such a lunch existing. Though pig feet remained a staple lunch in southern states, it was inferred that the taste was not why people stocked up on the food, rather it was because they were sold for cheap in markets. Children definitely disliked the jelly-like vinegary taste, so it makes sense that the food started vanishing from shops during the 2000s as fewer people bought pickled pig feet. Toad in the hole implies that you might be eating a frog, and not in a way you would want to imagine, but bear with me. Look, the British have funny names for what they love to eat, but every century or so they end up stumbling upon a wonderful dish that sticks with families across countries. The USA was one of those, and it got pretty infatuated with toads in the hole. This dish is actually just a sausage surrounded by a crispy layer of Yorkshire pudding batter, which gives this dish an extremely unique texture and experience. You might taste something like this again in your life, but you won't bite something like it again. It takes your typical pork sausages, the Yorkshire pudding, a gravy made of onions, which really goes well with the sauce, and even a bit of wine or Worcestershire sauce for a bit of a more complex flavor profile. You can put vegetables, but traditional takes on the dish are often only focused on the sausage, batter, and gravy aspect. You would make the batter in like 30 minutes, because letting it rest was important. You had to preheat the pan too, so that the dish would rise properly and brown the sausages as well. This was a hard dish to prepare, which is why it was really a labor of love. If you ever had these at your grandma's place, maybe call her up and give her some appreciation for it too. It's simple, but it's a traditional British meal that made its way to America and stayed for a very long while before tastes shifted and people moved on to bigger and flashier foods that had the power to go viral on social media. It's definitely what one would consider family cooking. Sometimes called bacon-wrapped smokies, bacon bow tie crackers were one of the most beloved appetizers in the 60s to 80s stretch of American food history. That was when bacon really exploded as this stereotypical American dish that everyone just incorporates into their diet. Sometimes people would amp up the grease by adding a thick but sweet glaze that definitely worked in favor of the bacon, just not so much for your arteries. Who cares about long-running health decisions in the face of potential food comas, though? It is not like people particularly watch what they eat around Christmas anyway, and we prefer it that way. You have the chewy goodness of bacon combined with crackers for a smoky, salty, but sweet meal that really gets you in your celebratory spirit. Despite their versatility and how easy they are to make, culinary trends were unfortunately just not shifting in their favor. Cheese and bacon are an ageless combo, and along with those bow tie crackers, people would stuff themselves with cheddar cheese straws. Have you ever thought about how much of our comfort food we have Southern American cuisine to thank for? The home chefs down there really know how to put you back in high gear before the weekend's over. So down to the specifics, these would be from grated cheddar cheese dough and have butter and some spices, flour and salt added. Put that through a cookie price and cut them into strips, and you have the whole thing ready to go. It was incredibly easy, even tastier than it sounds, and a great way to warm up after a long train ride on your way to your relatives. If you ever find yourself celebrating Christmas down in the South, you definitely should go to a local pub or bar and see if they are serving some of these. It was a well-beloved snack back in the 90s, but you should still be able to find some good straws today. Tripe is the edible stomach lining of cows, and it's one of those ingredients that makes you go, "Really?" But in many cultures, tripe was a beloved dish, often cooked in soups and stews. Here's the thing. These poverty foods weren't just about using the cheapest ingredients available. They were about resourcefulness and respecting the entire animal. People found ways to use every part, from the meat to the organs and even the stomach lining, turning what others might discard into nourishing meals. Now, as for tripe, it has a unique texture that's chewy but tender, and it soaks up flavors beautifully. Back in the day, it was a cheap way to add protein to a meal, especially when times were tough. It's the kind of dish that takes some getting used to, both in terms of taste and texture. Today, tripe is more likely to be found in ethnic cuisine than on the average American dinner table. It's one of those foods that hasn't quite stood the test of time, but it still has a loyal following among those who appreciate its unique qualities. What made its way onto the salad bars, the appetizer sections, and the hors d'oeuvres of the boomer era? Stuff like lima beans are a pretty solid palace to start. They used to be featured in this meat and three-style meals which involved meat. That was a tradition that peaked in the 70s, and it basically let a customer pick any one kind of meat and pair it with side dishes, up to 3 at a time, hence the name. It was definitely more of a southern lunch thing. Lima beans were one of those sides that would often get paired with traditional food like casseroles or roast beef, or even pot roasts. It was a great and affordable side to work with, and it worked a little bit of healthy eating into your life too, all while costing just a few cents. Now, I know my audience, and I know we've all grown up on 50 different flavors of cheese, from the finest imported wheels to the best local brands, but which of you really remembers Limburger cheese? It definitely was something that only a boomer would remember, and its glory days were in the 70s when European immigrants brought it over in bulk, and it started making a name for itself. It wasn't at the front lines making names and stealing pages in cookbooks, but it was on top of every cheese platter, smothered between every sandwich, and served as a topping on many other dishes regularly. Limburger sounds German, right? You'd be right, because it does have German origins. In fact, it also has German ties, as it was heavily marketed at communities with German-American populations, which were really common in the Midwest in that era. All right, I know these are all dishes that you can make at home and even make a whole day out of, but sometimes all you want is to pop open the garage, take your wife out for a night on the town, and have some comfort food. How did people do that in the 1970s? Speaking of strange meals, wait till you hear about hog maw. Now, this is a dish that's sure to impress your dinner guests. It's basically a pig's stomach stuffed with, well, who knows? Probably whatever was lying around. When you think of luxurious foods, a pig's stomach is probably the last thing that comes to mind. But back when wallets were tight, people had to make do with whatever they could find. It was found in American, soul food, Chinese, Mexican, Portuguese, Italian, and Vietnamese dishes. Hog maw was especially popular in Pennsylvania Dutch country, where nothing went to waste. Now, hog maw might sound a little fear factor-ish, but it was actually a way to stretch ingredients and make a filling meal for the whole family. It's like the ultimate meatloaf, if meatloaf came with an organ-based casing. These days, the idea of eating a pig's stomach might turn some people off, but back in the day, it was just another way to enjoy a meal. Bean bread is a unique type of bread made by mixing cooked beans into the dough. This dish was a creative way to stretch ingredients and make a filling, nutritious meal. The beans added protein and fiber, making the bread more substantial than your average loaf. Bean bread has a dense, hearty texture and a slightly nutty flavor from the beans. It's a bit of an acquired taste, but it was a practical solution during times when flour was scarce or expensive. In today's world of artisan breads and gluten-free options, bean bread hasn't exactly made a comeback. It's one of those foods that feels like a relic from another time, but it's still an interesting part of culinary history. If you're feeling adventurous, it might be worth trying your hand at baking a loaf just for the experience. So, cornmeal mush was the humble, comforting porridge made from, surprise, cornmeal. It became all the rage in the eastern and southeastern United States, and people in the Midwestern states ate it with maple syrup or molasses. In Eastern Europe, milk was poured over the meal once served and cooled down rather than being boiled in it. Imagine a bowl of yellow, gluey goop that your grandma would call comfort food. Don't get me wrong, I love a good hearty bowl of oatmeal, but cornmeal mush? That's a whole different level of bland. Apparently, people used to fry it up for breakfast. I guess it's a way to add some crunch to your mushy morning meal. This dish was a staple in many households during hard times because it was cheap, filling, and versatile. However, in today's world of avocado toast and acai bowls, cornmeal mush just doesn't stand a chance. So the next on our list is some Miracle Whip, and this magic spread was the key to making all your hunger vanish away in a gust of wind all the way back in 1969. Seriously, breakfast wasn't complete without this, and it became a staple of literally anything that involved mayo at all. It was a miracle-like spread that even used salads, and the reason it got so popular is because every mayo kind of tastes the same. You always have that strange tanginess with the sourness, but this one was a sweet mayo, and baby boomers grew up with it in their potato salads, their cold pasta, their sandwiches, and their pizza. It was definitely one of the most genre-defining products Kraft Heinz ever came out with, and people that were there for its time in the sun will remember that nothing really compares to the feeling of a Miracle Whip loaded mayo, bacon, lettuce, tomato sandwich. You may not be the biggest fan of main courses and savory, meaty, carb-filled dishes, so let's switch gears and talk about some boomer desserts that, in the time of the 1970s, they just could not go without. Now, homemade eggnog is something that comes to our tables as naturally and certainly as snow falls to the ground. An absolute must-have that Christmas just does not feel complete without. Something that even overtakes the esteemed fireplace and hearth in terms of getting the Christmas cheer going, it is a favorite. Have you ever wondered when exactly it first got viral, though? You would have to go back all the way to the colonial times, where it was really popular in medieval Europe, who eventually brought it with them to the American upper class as a Christmas treat. Since the ingredients were so simple and easy to get, normal people and households everywhere started making it too. While it is not as popular in homes in the 2020s as it once was, it is still an icon of Christmas cooking. When Spam was stocked up on the shelves of grocery stores, Americans used it to create their favorite lunch, a Spam sandwich. Spam, spicy and ham nicknamed thus, was sold as canned processed meat in markets where it found unprecedented success due to the great taste and cheap price tag. Eating processed meat on its own, however, was not as appealing as creating a sandwich was, and hence Spam sandwich was invented. People would either fry or grill Spam and sandwich it between bread with various condiments to ensure the lunch would not taste dry. Immediately, the masses took a liking to the cheap lunch. Just about anyone could cook up a Spam sandwich and please their stomachs during lunchtime. The sandwich remained popular until Spam started developing a bad reputation for having twice the amount of recommended fats for a healthy diet. This caused people to steer away from the processed meat. Sorrel soup is made from the sorrel plant, known for its tart, lemony flavor. This leafy green was often used in soups and stews, providing a bright, tangy taste that could liven up simple ingredients. Sorrel soup was especially popular in Eastern European and Middle Eastern cuisines, where it was often served with a dollop of cream or a boiled egg. Sorrel itself is a bit of a forgotten green these days, overshadowed by kale, spinach, and other more common leafy vegetables. Sorrel soup hasn't exactly made a splash in the modern culinary scene, but it's still a dish that holds a special place in the hearts of those who grew up with it. It's a refreshing, light soup that's perfect for a spring or summer meal, but it's not something you'll find on many restaurant menus today. Baked ham. With a brown sugar glaze is an American favorite, and that relationship has stayed tight throughout many years in the 20th century. Ham as a meal, particularly baked ham, came from the first wave of Europeans who migrated to America. With British-American cuisine now in the play, baked ham became such a popular option on the dinner menu at their houses that other Americans got interested. Soon, everyone was having baked ham, and midway into the 20th century, people started messing around with different glazes. Once they stumbled on brown sugar, which added this hit of caramel and made the ham so much richer, it became a primary choice for Christmas for many years, until brown sugar as an ingredient became very rare in American cuisine. Potted Huff is a dish made from the meat of the shin of a cow or pig, cooked and pressed into a pot with its own jelly-like juices. It's similar to head cheese but focuses on a specific part of the animal. This dish was often seasoned and served cold, sliced up with bread or pickles. Back in the day, potted hoof was a way to make use of tougher cuts of meat that needed slow cooking to become tender. It was a popular dish among working-class families in the UK and the US, providing a hearty, protein-rich meal. Nowadays, potted hoof has largely disappeared from the culinary scene, replaced by more refined meat products. It's a dish that hasn't stood the test of time, but it still offers a glimpse into the resourceful cooking of past generations. Many of the dishes on this list have muddied origins, so we cannot tell where they first came from, but we know who to thank for the old-school green bean casserole. Dorcas Riley first made this vintage slice of heaven in 1955 when she was working at the Campbell Soup Company. In their test kitchen in the home econ department, the company gave their workers a goal. This was to make a dish that was simple, effective, and appealing to the mass American palate, and could be made with ingredients people had in their homes. The result of that was the green bean casserole, and we gotta say, Dorcas really hit the nail right on the head. While today some places still make green bean casseroles, this original recipe that Riley first popularized in the mid-1900s is definitely a lost art. A strawberry pretzel jello salad. Let's take a look at this dish. It's definitely a big part of what you would call retro American culture, and it was very common during wintertime holidays and potlucks. It's really important that you let each layer of this rest and set properly because it's not just an assortment of veggies you can toss in and mix. The pretzel crust, the cream cheese, the jello layer, and the base all need to be set properly before the next one's added and chilled. It sounds like a lot of work, but I promise you, it really is an experience. I guess the saddest part about this dish is that it's completely a forgotten memory in the history of American cookbooks now. There was time in the middle of the 1900s that was really characterized by one thing and one thing only: creativity. You might be surprised to hear a salad like this exists, but back then people were making all kinds of colorful layered dishes that had explosive flavor profiles and would never shy away from the flavors their ingredients presented. Healthier versions of this salad used things like sugar-free jello, but it was never really a dish that was healthy to begin with. It was one of the best things to throw at a birthday party or for a cookout when you needed a break from the pork and the beef. Pine needle tea is exactly what it sounds like, tea made from steeped pine needles. This beverage was often consumed for its supposed health benefits, including a high vitamin C content. During times when citrus fruits were scarce or expensive, pine needle tea provided a natural source of this essential nutrient. The flavor of pine needle tea is refreshing and slightly piney, with a hint of citrus. It's not the most conventional tea, but it has a certain rustic charm. However, it's not something you'll find on the shelves of your local tea shop. Pine needle tea is more of a survivalist or herbal remedy than a daily drink. While it hasn't become a mainstream favorite, it's still enjoyed by those who appreciate its unique flavor and natural benefits. Ambrosia pudding pie was a dish that shook some culinary norms when it first came around because it has its roots in ambrosia salad. This salad was a traditional dish at American tables throughout the 30s to 50s and much of the early 20th century. A pretty citrusy and flavorful mix, it usually had things like coconut, mini marshmallows, oranges, and diced pineapple. First, people added whipped cream and cream dressings, which eventually led to using it as a pie filling in a beautifully presented pie crust. It was a real showstopper, the kind that would leave your in-laws speechless during dinner and gossiping non-stop after it. The crust is usually filled with either an ambrosia pudding or custard, and some states like the South would add fruits or nuts too. It definitely is something that is more of a nostalgic sweet than a current trend today, despite its strong pros. Cracklins, on the other hand, I can get behind. They're basically pork rinds, but with a fancy name. Finally, a normal, delicious meal that doesn't make your nose wrinkle. Cracklins were essentially the popcorn of the pork world. These crispy, crunchy bits were made from frying pieces of pork fat and skin until they puff up and become irresistible little nuggets. In the days when every part of the pig was used, cracklins were a way to make a snack out of what would otherwise be discarded. But here's the catch. These didn't really have a lot of benefits when you ate them. Yeah, nothing really screams healthy about eating deep-fried pieces of pork. Think of them as the porky cousin of potato chips. These days, you're more likely to find them in specialty southern stores than on your local supermarket shelf. Cracklins may not be the healthiest choice, but they're a tasty reminder of a time when people knew how to make the most of what they had. Pickled pig's feet are exactly what they sound like. Pig feet that have been pickled in a vinegar solution with spices. This dish was popular in the South and among certain ethnic groups, offering a tangy, chewy treat that was often eaten as a snack or side dish. The process of pickling preserved the pig's feet, making them a practical choice in times before refrigeration. The vinegar and spices added a punch of flavor that helped mask the natural taste of the feet. Today, pickled pig's feet are more of a novelty than a common food item. They might still be found in some specialty stores, but they're far from a mainstream snack. It's a dish that has mostly fallen out of favor, but for those who enjoy it, it's a taste of nostalgia. Chitlins, or chitterlings, are not for the faint of heart. We're talking pig intestines. Yep, you heard that right. These were cleaned, boiled, and sometimes fried up as a delicacy. Well, more like a necessity. Chitlins were a way to make sure no part of the animal went to waste, especially during lean times. They were also sometimes filled with forcemeat to make sausage, and intestines from other animals, such as cow, lamb, goose, and goat, were also used for making chitterlings. This strange delicacy was a traditional food of the southern United States that spread nationwide with the Black migration. These were taken off our dinner tables for better or worse. It's the kind of dish that makes you appreciate how far food has come and perhaps makes you grateful for modern refrigeration and food safety standards. Chicken alouettes were a bit of a new idea that most common folk had to grapple with, but one they happily warmed up to all the same. Chicken breasts that were typically packed with fillings mixed with herbs, veggies, and cheese, and bell peppers pan-seared to perfection. It was something that only had regional popularity, especially in French-American communities. During the start of the 60s, America would have a much more growing interest in how much cooking differed from region to region and in different states. They began to take more ideas from their neighbors hundreds of miles away, especially when French cooking was something people got more infatuated with here. Gotta love some of that Paris charm on your dinner table, right? You could still find a good one at a nice French-American joint today, but it is not something home cooks would be familiar with now. Typically, another party dish that would be served alongside such pies were slow cooker grape jelly meatballs. Now, the entire recipe and process might make you question what we are talking about here, but give us a minute and we will have you on board. See, people found out in their tinkering of American cuisine that jellies and sauces work together, particularly grape jelly and chili or barbecue sauce. They would typically be mixed in a slow cooker, then the meatballs were added, and it was cooked for 4 to 5 hours. We cannot be sure who made this yummy treat served on a toothpick, but community recipe collections around the 70s and 60s first featured the idea of mixing jelly and sauces. Maybe it came from a neighborhood one Merry Christmas night? Our list of forgotten lunches would be incomplete without mentioning bean sandwiches. You may not have even heard of this vegetable-based take on sandwiches, but decades ago, bean sandwiches were part of many lunch tables. Home chefs preferred this healthy take on sandwiches, even though cooking beans was a tedious task because you would end up with a flavorful and well-seasoned meal. According to the traditional recipe, the sandwich was cooked beans that were sometimes mashed and served on bread with toppings like vegetables and cheese. Like any other sandwich, the bean sandwich was highly customizable and satisfied just about anyone's cravings. If you had leftover beans from dinner, making a bean sandwich could be your best option. Since people were conscious of leftovers and wanted the most value out of all of their meals, bean sandwiches were a good way to utilize beans. Still, the combination was a little odd, and not a lot of states would pick up this lunch option. As meat delis opened up across the states, bean sandwiches were forgotten to be a thing of the past. Introduced in the heyday of frozen TV dinners, chicken pot pie rose to fame in the 1950s when pre-made lunches were the new trend. Chicken pot pie was advertised as a convenient lunch that could feed a whole family without any culinary effort. It definitely helped that the pie was a marvel, taste-wise. Think of a flaky pastry crust filled with chicken, vegetables, and creamy sauce. If your mouth is watering right now, just imagine how attracted families were by this pre-made lunch. Chicken pot pie was a lunch classic in households by the late 1950s, with almost every house having it as lunch at least once a week. Alas, as most processed frozen foods have downfalls, chicken pot pie also lost its footing in the pre-made market. Items like Lunchables and frozen fried foods gained more traction through TV advertisements, and chicken pot pie was replaced on the lunch table. Clabber is soured milk that was often used in baking or eaten as a spread with sugar or fruit. Before the days of refrigeration, clabber was a common way to use up milk that had started to sour. The natural bacteria in the milk would ferment it, creating a thick, yogurt-like consistency. Clabber might sound a bit strange to modern ears, but it was a staple in many households. It's similar to yogurt or buttermilk, both of which are still popular today. However, clabber itself has fallen out of favor, likely due to its strong, tangy flavor and the modern preference for fresher dairy products. It's a reminder of a time when people made use of every bit of food they had. Honey glazed carrots are just as good of a refresher as a fun winter salad, and they are wonderful to munch on if you do not feel like eating spoonfuls of even some dessert. Glazed carrots were a common side served alongside a hot and tender potato casserole during the 60s to 80s. It was almost a given, really. Dishes like these really drove the seasonal demand up in the local farmers market, and it was a common part of grocery shopping lists. A honey-glazed carrot serving is usually soaked in a sweet and thick mix of butter, brown sugar, and sometimes cinnamon. People would caramelize their carrots as well and serve them with ham for style points. Honestly, we cannot be sure why this ever faded away, since it seems like a pretty solid idea all around, but you can never predict culture changes. Rum balls were a confection that people adored in the early 20th century. It would typically be made of chocolate and some rum with crumbs of cookies or nuts mixed in for a crunchy sensation. It is not sure where they came from or who started them, but after their initial introduction in the early parts of the 20th century, they really spiked in popularity in the mid-half. Most variations would include powdered sugar and cocoa powder, and the idea itself was something a lot of Americans could get behind pretty easily. Bite-sized rum-soaked balls were not something you needed to ask anyone twice about us, including us, because if you saw these at the function, you were definitely stopping to get a couple. People would often do a lot of their Christmas cooking a day in advance or in the afternoon before the big guests came, so having delicacies like make-ahead yeast rolls in the fridge was a common sight. These would be made in advance and typically frozen before they were ready to be baked. The best part about these rolls was that they were empathetic about the fact that you had a busy work schedule, and that is why they got so popular. People could just make entire batches of these and leave them in the fridge, waiting for just the right moment to begin baking them. You would never even be able to tell you were eating pre-made food because of how fresh it is and how soft the preparation makes it. It gets 2 rises to achieve the perfect fluffy consistency. All in all, this was a wonderful Christmas snack, and we would not mind if it came back. Similar to Spam sandwiches, fried luncheon meat sandwiches also used processed meat to create a comforting lunch. Luncheon meat was the name given to cold cuts of meat that included cooked, sliced, deli, and sandwich meats. During World War II, strict rationing of fresh meat prompted the population to find solace in luncheon meats. Necessity led to the creation of a sandwich made with fried slices of luncheon meat, topped with any vegetable or condiment available at the time. Luncheon meats had a long shelf life and required little to no cooking preparation, allowing people to conveniently assemble multiple sandwiches for lunch and keep their bellies full. Ultimately, the sandwich became a part of American cuisines and family diets, which allowed it to be popular even after meat rationing was reduced. Luncheon meat's fame declined only when health concerns were raised in regards to the sodium and fat content in processed meats. These Swanson fried chicken TV dinners were literally the best thing you could get on a budget if you wanted to make your movie viewing sessions infinitely better. They barely cost anything, and you had 280-degree seasoned fried chicken cutlets, which came as frozen dinners. All you had to do was cook them, and by cook we mean flip until golden brown. Sounds easy enough, right? So is mashing some potatoes, which people would often make as a side. Add some thyme and rosemary for the ambiance, and you have yourself a gourmet meal under $10. We cannot stress how much of a reliable comfort food these were, and since they never made you tense up about spending unnecessarily, you could eat with a smile on your face. Unfortunately, they got discontinued in the 2000s despite enjoying such a strong market presence. If you loved this video as much as we loved making it, give it a like, share your favorite meal in the comments, and hit subscribe to stay connected.